Okay, marijuana is the most widely used illicit drug in the world and is the drug of choice in many countries. Most of them are English-speaking countries, Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Actually, there's good research coming out of Canada and Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand's the one that did the longitudinal study looking at people who smoked pot 25 years ago. To see what they look like today. One of the things they discovered is that if you start smoking marijuana, it rearranges your brain. If you start smoking marijuana before the age of 12, it rearranges your brain and you lose 10 to 20 points, IQ points, which is something that people need to think about. You don't actually lose IQ points if you start afterwards because your brain is already has its adult structure, or at least the memory structure is your adult structure. So those individuals that start smoking pot after age 12, the effects are different. And we are getting good research coming out of Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Other areas where marijuana is fairly prevalent in Central America, Costa Rica and El Salvador and Mexico and Panama. In the United States, the penalties for possession and use vary from state to state. Of course, we have the 10 states that have legalized marijuana, so it'll be interesting to watch to see what's going on in those states, to see if automobile accidents increase, to see if IQ scores drop, if school achievement starts to suffer because the kids potentially, even though they're not supposed to, may be smoking pot. In 2004, 44.2% of the arrests for drugs were for marijuana. 90% of these arrests were for possession alone. Marijuana arrests almost doubled from 1980 to 2004. So, other countries punished for marijuana: Austria, Belgium, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, and Spain don't prosecute for small amounts for personal use. So if you have a select amount, you can't smoke in public in any of these states, but you can smoke in the privacy of your own home. They have, in the Netherlands, they have bars. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. They have bars where you can smoke, you're supposed to smoke your hashish. They don't actually smoke marijuana over there. In England, possession of marijuana could lead to 5-year prison term, though most sentences are minimal. In the Netherlands, marijuana use is limited to the coffee shops. Sales outside this system are considered to be illegal, but of course they don't really prosecute. Quick story, I married a lady and then she divorced me. We divorced each other. We aren't married anymore, okay? And then she married another guy. And she married him when she got orders to Schusterberg in Holland. And the reason he wanted to marry her was because hashish is legal in the Netherlands. So their whole relationship was based on smoking pot, or smoking hashish in his case. Really kind of fascinating. Of course, the marriage didn't last. Her deal was, okay, I will marry you, I'll take you over to Amsterdam so you can have a good time, but you have to get me pregnant. That was the deal. And of course, she couldn't get pregnant, and so she didn't get pregnant, and she didn't like him that much anyway. I actually met her over there. It was a bit of a shock, as you can imagine. This lady had left me, and I had only seen her a couple times between the time when I thought we were happy and the time when we got divorced. I only saw her a couple times. And here I ran into her in Amsterdam, in Schusterberg, which is right outside of Amsterdam. I almost had a heart attack, I'll tell you. It was a shock. She liked me a lot more than she liked her husband. Which, wow, this is going to be a tough one to talk about. Is it that kind of a situation? Yeah, it was an ugly situation. She really didn't like her husband, but she wanted to get pregnant. I couldn't get her pregnant. So she's chasing somebody else to get her pregnant. As it turned out, it was in Holland where they have free medical care that she went to the doctor and found out that she was sterile, that she was the problem. So what happened next? So they fixed her. What had happened was her fallopian tubes had adhesed to her colon, and it put a crimp in her eustachian tubes. Yeah, not her eustachian tubes, her fallopian tubes. Anyway, so the eggs couldn't get out, so she couldn't get pregnant. So what they did a histocytopengiogram where they went in through her belly button and they pulled the fallopian tube away from the colon and straightened it out as best they could. And the next month, she got pregnant. So there you go. I guess he did fulfill what he was supposed to do. But because of all the scarring in her fallopian tube, the egg got stuck, and she had an ectopic pregnancy, blew out her fallopian tube. So now she's only got one left. So what does she do? Well, she gets rid of that guy, stops having sex on a even infrequent basis because she was afraid she'd get pregnant, and it was a really strange situation after that. Eventually, she did have a couple babies, but they were by artificial insemination. She's the one that asked me if I would donate sperm so that she could. I know, she wanted to have my baby. That's kind of exciting. It's like nobody has ever wanted that in my life. Not even the woman I actually impregnated. Anyway, okay, so that's the Netherlands. So she got married to this guy so that he could smoke hashish in Amsterdam. And eventually, of course, they broke up and she married somebody else. Eventually, she married somebody else.
Mine's actually the other way around.
Oh, was that right?
The person that I wanted to be the father didn't end up being the father. It turned out to be the one that I hated that became the end up to be the father.
Hate it when that happens.
Yeah. I still don't know why I don't like him so much.
I don't know why you would want to have intercourse with somebody that you hated.
Why?
Don't explain. Don't explain.
I figured I wouldn't get pregnant because I was told that I couldn't have children.
And it was a lie. Some countries have the death penalty for possession of hard drugs, which includes marijuana, and that is Algeria, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Singapore, Turkey, and Thailand. So if you want to push drugs, those are not the places to go. They will put you to death. Other countries punish for marijuana. In Japan, possession is illegal and people can go to jail for having less than an ounce of marijuana. If you have any residue of marijuana, they will arrest you. Smugglers with larger amounts of marijuana will routinely be imprisoned for 3 to 4 years. Foreigners who are caught are deported after they serve out their sentence. These individuals will often be banned from re-entering Japan for life. Paul McCartney cannot go to Japan. He was caught in 1980 with marijuana in his luggage. He was immediately, of course, he was in Japan for a concert. They had to cancel the concert and they shipped him out right away. He never left the airport. So Paul McCartney, the only part of Japan he's ever seen is Narita Airport in Tokyo. He got caught. In India, an individual can be imprisoned for up to 10 years for smoking marijuana. Venezuela has a minimum 10-year prison sentence. Donald Trump has recently talked about executing drug dealers, like they do in the Philippines, which I thought was kind of interesting. I know I keep picking on this guy, but he keeps saying stupid things, okay? Yeah, are we going to start executing drug dealers? No.
And then sending all the native Indians back to India for that kind of remark.
Well, that's right. I forgot. Oh man, how stupid can you be? Evidently pretty stupid. Where are we? Okay, there we are. People caught for reckless driving or after having an accident are frequently not only tested for alcohol, but other drugs as well. In the case of marijuana, there are some circumstances that make this information erroneous. Marijuana stays in your system for weeks after it stops having a psychedelic effect on the individual, so you could actually have a positive drug test, despite the fact it's not really affecting you. Elimination rates often vary by individual because of fat content. There is little accurate data about how much marijuana in the system causes impairment, so we don't have this information. There's often another drug in the system at the same time, especially alcohol is relatively common. Johnny's bag is here, so let me mark it. There we go. Close enough. While the research is fairly concrete when dealing with alcohol and impairment, we know that a certain amount of alcohol makes you drunk. Marijuana is not as simple. It all depends on the individual, it all depends on the fat content, it all depends on when they last smoked pot as to whether they are actually inebriated or not. Statistics dealing with marijuana and traffic problems often involve polydrug use. 65% of heavy drinkers also use marijuana. People who drive under the influence of marijuana often are paranoid and drive too slowly for traffic. I keep talking about my friend that just died. He used to tell me everything, and it was really kind of interesting. He started drinking heavily after his first wife left him. And when he started drinking heavily, he started smoking pot. This guy's a cop, okay? Whoops. So he's a policeman. All of a sudden he started to drink heavily. He resigned from the force, moved out to West Virginia, where it's easier to find marijuana and easier to stay drunk. Well, he drank himself almost to death, smoking pot the entire time. He meets this lady who is an evangelist, and he stopped drinking and he stopped smoking pot, which is really kind of interesting. And then now he's, of course, died of a heart attack. He has been with her for, I don't know, he was with her for about 10 years, I guess. But there for a while he was drinking and smoking pot a lot.
Isn't the police work the highest stress job though?
Oh yeah, oh sure. Well, he could have used that as an excuse, but the reality is that he was handling, I mean, he had been a cop for like 30 years. So he had been handling the stress from the job over the years. He's a pretty lazy guy too. He wasn't a very good policeman. But the real stress was the fact that he just left his wife, or his wife had just left him. She finally kicked him out, I guess. He was kind of a mess anyway. He was a real big mess. Bought himself a BMW and moved out to West Virginia, where nobody owns any German cars. So he was like everybody going, oh, did you see the guy in the BMW? That's the one. So that was his claim to fame, being the guy in the German car. People who drive under the influence of marijuana often are paranoid and drive too slowly for traffic. That wasn't his problem. Usually he drove faster than he should have been driving. But then again, he was a cop, so he was used to getting away with stuff. Research shows impaired driving for marijuana smokers up to 8 hours after smoking, and 60% failed 2.5 hours after smoking a moderate amount. So you really can't drive after you've been smoking pot. And it may be the next day before you can start driving, because some individuals, it all depends on the amount of fat that you have, the fat content. So if you are female, you can start driving sooner after smoking pot. But if you're male and you have less fat, then you can't. A French study showed marijuana is a factor in 10% of the traffic accidents in France. In the United States, a study showed marijuana is a factor in 4 to 14% of injury or fatal accidents. Most drug urine tests place the cutoff for marijuana use at 50 nanograms per milliliter. For long-term smokers of marijuana, this amount of drug could be found in their system as long as 3 weeks after the last use. So if you're a heavy marijuana user, then you're not going to be clean. You're not going to be able to. You shouldn't be able to drive for 3 weeks after you smoke pot. It would take a total of 6 weeks for a heavy smoker to test completely negative. A first-time or infrequent user should be able to test negative 24 to 48 hours after use. And of course, this is the question, isn't it? The Olympic Committee sets a cutoff negative at 15 nanograms per milliliter. Marijuana and its extracts have been used medicinally since the beginning of recorded history. It has been used as a muscle relaxant, as an analgesic, analgesic is a painkiller, as an appetite stimulant, to control spasms and convulsions, to calm anxiety, to treat asthma, to treat jaundice, beriberi, and ague, to stimulate childbirth, to relieve coughs, to treat withdrawal from opiates and alcohol, and as an antibiotic. Modern medicine uses marijuana or its derivatives to treat glaucoma, nausea and pain, to subdue uncontrolled movements in multiple sclerosis, to stimulate weight gain for wasting illnesses such as cancer and AIDS. And of course, we're still using these drugs for this, especially multiple sclerosis. It has an effect on people that are epileptic. It reduces their number of seizures, so that works as well. Unfortunately, abuses of the system have led to limitations on acceptance of marijuana for medicinal purposes. What happened in Montana, they were voting on whether they would legalize marijuana. And the assumption was there's less than 1 million people in Montana. So they thought that there would be maybe 6,000 people that would use marijuana medicinally. This is people dying that are suffering from cancer or AIDS. Potentially it was individuals who had chronic back pain. They assumed that there would be about 6,000 people. As it turned out, they legalized medical marijuana in Montana, and the next thing that happened was they had doctors coming in from California, and if you went in and said, you know, dude, I get headaches, they would prescribe marijuana for you. So the 6,000 turned out to be 60,000. It's close to 100,000 individuals using medical marijuana in Montana. That's 1/10 of the population, as odd as that sounds. Marijuana and its derivatives containing THC have been incorporated into select pharmaceuticals. Dronabinol and Marinol and Sesamet are medications containing THC that can be given to individuals for nausea and pain control. Dronabinol is something that they gave to my sister when she was dying of cancer. She wouldn't take it because she said it made her feel loopy, and she didn't like that feeling, so she didn't take any of it. They kept giving it to her, even though she said she didn't want it. They assumed that she was either using it and not admitting it, or that she was that she would start using it once the pain got intense. She never did. So she died with like 150 tabs of Dronabinol in the refrigerator. So the first thing that my parents did, they got a call. They were in Muncie. She was living in Carmel. They ran over there as fast as they could to dump that stuff down the toilet because they knew that her husband would use it, and of course he didn't have any reason to be using it, but he would just use it to get stoned. Anyway, they dumped it down the toilet. Sativex is a spray that is used as an inhaler by people suffering from multiple sclerosis to aid with movement coordination. These medications are merely maintenance drugs. Some patients have complained that the drugs give them the feeling that they're getting better when they are actually staying the same or getting worse. Of course, it makes you feel good, so you think you're actually getting better. Whether you have cancer, whether you have AIDS or MS, all of a sudden you can move better than you did before. You have more pain control, so you think you're getting better. But the reality is, of course, MS never gets better, and neither does cancer or AIDS. You don't recover from AIDS. If a patient has a history of addiction, the medications can lead to a relapse, and that, of course, can be a problem. The National Drug Control Policy Commission researched the use of marijuana as a medication and came up with the following conclusions. Cannabinoids have a natural role in pain modulation, control of movement, and memory. THC has potential therapeutic value for pain relief, control of nausea and vomiting, and as an appetite stimulant. Smoking marijuana is a crude method of delivery of THC and also delivers potentially harmful substances. The psychological effects of cannabinoids include anxiety reduction, sedation, and euphoria, and it can be therapeutic. Marijuana smoking is a serious risk factor for the development of respiratory diseases. The reality is that it's not the THC that's helping people. The pain control chemical in marijuana is CBD. It's a different chemical. So you can actually isolate the CBD without giving the individual the THC. And it's the THC that is the hallucinogen. So you can actually fractionate the marijuana and you can give them the pain control mechanism or the chemical that actually controls pain. So that's the CBD oil that they talk so much about. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 6. I'll get off my soapbox now. And we'll start talking about other problems, other drugs, inhalants, for example. Other addictions and other drugs. Okay, this is a fun chapter. I'm going to be talking about sex. I apologize. I'm going to be talking about sex and select sexual positions. And I apologize, but this has to do with one of the inhalants. So just be prepared. Understand that you're going to be hearing about different sexual positions. Actually, it's only one sexual position. Other drugs, inhalants, volatile liquids, aerosol sprays, gases that come in pressurized tanks, anything that sprays. These substances have many of the same psychoactive effects as street drugs do. And of course, they're cheaper, they're out there, they're in your garage, they're underneath your sink. You have these things in your house. There are other drugs out there, sports drugs, natural and synthetic substances. They accelerate the healing of injuries, they increase performance, they alter the state of the athlete's consciousness. Hard to classify drugs, animal extracts, herbal preparations, smart drugs and drinks, nootropics. These have been used for their psychoactive effects. They've been used to improve mental health. They've been used to improve physical health. So these are some of the other drugs that are hard to classify. Inhalants are used because the user finds it stupefying, they find it intoxicating, and occasionally they find it psychedelic. There are 3 main groups of inhalants: volatile solvents and aerosols, volatile nitrites, and anesthetics. Most of the volatile solvents and aerosols are synthesized from petroleum and mixed with other chemicals. Hydrocarbons are found in glues, in gasoline, and in nail polish remover. And in the old days, people used to huff these things. And maybe they still do, I don't know. Many aerosols are inhaled for their propellants rather than their ascribed contents. Other volatile organic compounds include esters, ketones, alcohols, and glycols. You need to be really careful with this stuff. We used to use ketones to wash things down because it's very good at removing dust or for cleaning off surfaces. So we used to use ketones, but then we found out that ketones were carcinogenic. And now you can't find any cleaning solutions with ketones in them. People, if you were cleaning with ketones, and of course in the military, you can do anything you want to do. Actually, that's not really true. You can do anything they let you do. And so some of their solvents are really, really powerful. And if you get in a closed room with this stuff, it can knock you out. And of course, if you're in there too long, it can cause you a lot of damage. So you have to be really careful with this stuff. When you're cleaning something like a jet engine, you need the best cleaning solvent that you can get, because you certainly don't want anything that disrupts the efficiency of the engine. So these guys are cleaning with gasoline, they're cleaning with ketones, and of course that's one of the reasons why hangars look like they do. I mean, if they were more closed systems, then potentially these guys would get high and maybe pass out. So that's the way it works. We used to clean with solvents as well when I worked in the lab. And at the time, of course, they didn't say anything about ketones being carcinogenic. So potentially I could develop some kind of a cancer from using this stuff, 50 years ago, 45 years ago. The volatile nitrites include butyl and amyl nitrites. These drugs are used as vasodilators for people with heart problems. They have also been used in air fresheners. So you got this stuff in your house. Illicitly, they are used recreationally at parties, but especially in sexual situations. And I'm going to explain those sexual situations in just a minute. Anesthetics are used to block pain or induce unconsciousness for medical procedures. Nitrous oxide is used in dentistry for anxious patients who do not wish to use Novocaine. It's also called laughing gas, of course. It's not uncommonly used at parties to induce giddiness and euphoria. One of the problems with nitrous oxide is that it also makes people aggressive. So you see a lot of fights where there's nitrous oxide at a party. So it's kind of dangerous. Unless you like to fight. Then it's not dangerous at all. The most widely used inhalants are nitrous oxide, nitrites, gasoline, glue, spray paint, aerosol sprays, lacquer thinner, and correction fluid. Once upon a time, they used to sell the whiteout in huge boxes, and you could buy these, just massive amounts of this stuff. Now, in order to buy it, or in order to get it, you have to go to somebody and sign for it, and you have to swear that you're not going to use it as an inhalant. It's really strong stuff. Whiteout. Correction fluid. It's funny. It works. I mean, it works as a correction fluid, but it also works as an inhalant. And you can get really stoned on that stuff. Inhalants are sought because they are quick acting with intense effects. They enter the bloodstream within 7 to 10 seconds and may last for a few minutes up to an hour. They are cheap, readily available, and widespread. There are more than 1,500 chemical products that can be inhaled for their psychoactive effects. If anybody has any whiteout, look at it, look at the bottle. It will tell you that not to use it in a confined space because it could be toxic. There's really no reason to have correction fluid, I guess, because nobody has typewriters anymore. Do you have correction fluid? Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Well, it's not the bottle.
Oh.
It's
a pen? Oh, okay. Well, let's see, you can't get stoned on that stuff.
Yeah.
Does it say anything about intoxication?
No.
Okay, it's because it's in a pen. There's hardly anything in there. It really does work. They're readily accessible to children and adolescents, as many exist in any garage or home. They have more direct toxic effects on body tissue. There is a lack of awareness of inhalants as drug problems, and of course this can be a really serious problem. Inhalant abuse is most prevalent among adolescents. Inhalants account for from 700 to 1,200 deaths in the United States per year. Once upon a time, we used to build model airplanes or model cars, and we used glue. And then it turned out that these kids were huffing the glue. They were snorting the glue. I know. So they changed the configuration of glue, of plastic glue. It used to work really, really well. The crap they have now barely works at all. But it's made out of the outside of the rind of a citrus fruit. That's what it's made, and it smells like grapefruit or something. Yeah. Can't get high from it at all. This is a worldwide problem, as cheap highs are sought by the young, the poor, the street children, recent migrants to cities, indigenous peoples, and children of parents who work at home with volatile chemicals. The inhalant of choice in many poor countries is gasoline because of its availability. And you can huff gasoline. Inhalants are most likely abused by 12 to 17-year-olds and more females than males. Really? Hairspray. Product. Any kind of a product that you put in your hair potentially has one of these inhalants in them. This problem was especially serious in the 1990s, but has since dissipated. American Indian and white adolescents are more likely to use inhalants than blacks or Asians. Once again, it's white people and American Indians that are number one. We're at number one. Suicides, same thing. White people and American Indians, most likely to use it. There are 7 methods of using. You can sniff, breathing in the inhalant through the nose directly from the container. You can huff, soaking material and putting the material over the mouth and nose. You can bag, soaking material and placing the material in a bag to be inhaled through the nose or mouth. You can spray, spraying the inhalant directly into the nose or mouth. You can use what they refer to as balloons and crackers, puncturing a can of inhalant and capturing it in a balloon for inhaling, which is kind of weird. Masking, spraying an aerosol into a bag and then putting the bag over your head. That's known as masking. Or you can put it on your clothing, so that if you're having a bad time, you just reach over and sniff it. So I'm going to be watching you guys to see if you're sniffing your own clothes. The only reason I sniff my own clothes is to find out if I have body odor. Which smells like ammonia, but it doesn't get you high. I don't think it does anyway. Volatile solvents are carbon and hydrocarbon-based compounds that turn to gas at room temperature. Gasoline is this way, gasoline additives, paints, especially metallic paints. A lot of people hate the smell of paints, and it's mostly because of these accelerants that they use. Kerosene, air dusters, paint thinners, lacquers, nail polish remover, spot remover, glues and plastic cements, and lighter fluid. All of those things have hydrocarbons in them. Volatile solvents are absorbed very readily into the blood and move to the heart, brain, and liver within 7 to 10 seconds. It gives you temporary stimulation. It gives you an elevated mood, usually. It reduces your inhibitions, makes you more likely to do something. Impulsive, makes you more impulsive. It gives you excitement. It makes you irritable, makes you dizzy. It slurs your speech. It gives you an unsteady gait, and it makes you drowsy. These inhalants are exhaled by the lungs and excreted by the kidneys. And as long as you don't breathe in too much, you're probably going to be okay, because your body is trying to take care of it. You're breathing most of it out as you exhale, but what gets into your blood system is actually excreted by the kidneys, and it's taken out relatively quickly. It only takes about 5 minutes to get this run of the entire mass of blood through your system and get it filtered through your kidneys.
Hydrocarbon is what affects you?
Yeah.
Is the hydrocarbon?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same thing as when they make wine? Like how they...
No, that's carbonation.
Okay, so the...
Hydrocarbons are gasoline products.
Oh, okay.
Like oil, kerosene,
Okay.
lighter fluid.
So
Naphtha.
it's hydrocarbon and there's the carbon.
Carbonated, yeah, carbonation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. So don't worry about drinking your pop. You're not going to get it. And don't try pouring your pop into your car in case you run out of gas. That's not going to work either. It's not a hydrocarbon. For prolonged inhalation, the users may experience delirium with confusion, psychomotor clumsiness, emotional instability, impaired thinking, and coma. Long-term effects of inhalants use: arrhythmias and myocarditis. Sounds really good. So these are 12-year-olds. Okay, so remember, these kids are 12-year-olds. They're snorting this stuff in somebody's garage, and now all of a sudden they've given themselves a chronic problem. Arrhythmias and myocarditis. Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle. This is not something that you want. Pulmonary hypertension, respiratory distress, and lowered breathing capacity. You're destroying your lungs. In essence, you're destroying your lungs. Liver toxicity, Liver toxicity can turn into liver cancer, can turn into a liver abscess. Of course, this isn't looking very good, is it? Carboxyhemoglobin may cause brain damage because you're replacing the hemoglobin, the oxygen, you're destroying the hemoglobin, and because of that, it's also destroying brain cells. Some inhalants may cause neonatal growth retardation, odd facial features, and tremors in newborns. So this is not something that a mother that is pregnant wants to do, because potentially she can cause lots and lots of problems. And I've seen this. I used to work in at Children's Hospital in Omaha, and we would get all of the bad cases from western Iowa and from all of Nebraska and the southern South Dakota. We get all of them, and it was a mess. We sometimes got kids, well, I don't even want to talk about what they look like, but the reality is this can really screw up a kid. Facial malformations, things like, we had a kid that was born without a skull. I guess I didn't talk about that. Okay, sorry. You can imagine, okay. You need a form, okay? You need your skull to keep all this stuff in. And he was born without a skull. It was a mess. He didn't survive. We had a kid that was born with his heart on the outside of his body. We had a little girl that was born with her kidneys on the outside. Oh God, that was a mess. So we tried to put them back in. They were malformed. So we tried to give her a kidney transplant, and she died on the operating table. But, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We were just trying to help. It just didn't work. Anyway, ugly stuff. While most huffers move on to other drugs, those who stay with inhalants can expect some fairly debilitating effects. Poor coordination characteristics, inability to concentrate, weakness, disorientation, weight loss. Is all this looking attractive yet? Memory loss due to hippocampal interference, poor problem-solving skills, difficulty controlling one's behavior, blood irregularities, and chromosomal damage. All because they want to be cool, unfortunately. So, and I don't know about you, but I think all of these things are about the least cool thing you can possibly imagine. Chronic huffers tend to have antisocial personality disorder, but it is not sure whether the huffing causes the behavior or the environment that they live in. These individuals also tend to use whatever drug they come across, and of course, this can lead to a lot of serious problems. The most widely abused substance is toluene, methylbenzene, because it is such a good accelerant, and it is in many products, such as glue, drying agents, solvents, thinners, paints, inks, and cleaning agents. 65% of the chronic abusers of toluene have neurological damage. So just trying to be cool, of course, and huffing this stuff, they cause themselves neurological damage. Can you recover from neurological damage? No, it's permanent. TCE is another common solvent found in substances used for huffing. Correction fluid has TCE in it. Paints, metal degreasers, spot removers, extracting oils and fats from vegetables. It causes depression and moderate hallucinations. If used heavily, it can cause neuropathy. Some of these neuropathies can be permanent, of course. Anyway, nerve problems. N-hexane and methylbutyl ketone, NBK, are solvents used for glues, solvents used for adhesives, diluents for plastics, diluents for rubber, in the production of laminated products, as a paint thinner, as a solvent for dyes. This stuff has been shown to cause neurological damage, especially in the brain. Recovery can take up to 3 years for your brain to recover just from using it one time. Small molecule alkanes are gaseous at room temperature and cause cardiac arrhythmias and sudden death, and include methane, ethane, butane, and propane. Large molecule alkanes are also neurotoxic and include hexane and pentane. Okay, this is the stuff, okay, let's pretend that somebody is flatulent and they fart. I know it doesn't hardly ever happen. But if it happened to happen, the stuff that you pass, the gas that you pass is methane. That stuff is methane. Methane in small doses like that is no problem. But in large doses, methane is deadly. I used to live in Montana. In Montana, they have a group of Anabaptists that are called Huterites. They're like Amish or Mennonites, if you know these people. Anyway, they live in colonies, and each colony has their specialty. So one colony will produce chickens. Another colony will produce roasting ears. They'll produce corn. Another colony will produce pigs. Another colony will have dairy cows, and they will produce eggs. They produce butter and milk, and then of course they have their cows. And other colonies will produce beef cows. So, and they trade back and forth. They'll trade their stuff back and forth. You give me 6 chickens, and I'll give you, 5 pounds of butter, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so the pig farm is just north of Havre, Montana. The pig farm, the colony that raises pigs. What they were doing was they were taking the pig manure. It was a really clean operation, and so they would have the pigs in pens, and they would clean them out every day. And they would take a scraper and they pull. I don't know if you've ever been around pig manure, but it's not all that solid. Sometimes it's fairly liquid, kind of runny sometimes. Anyway, so they pull it. They use a scraper and they pull the stuff out, and then they dump it into a concrete holding pen, and they would use it as fertilizer. Well, pig manure has a lot of methane in it anyway. If you've ever been around pigs, but that's not the point. The point is that their feces has a lot of methane in it, or it creates a lot of methane. So they were taking this stuff and they were dumping it into this cement holding pond. Holding pit. And one day, the guy that was scraping the stuff off fell into the pit. His wife was there, and she went over and tried to grab his hand and pull him out. The guy that fell into the pit, he only fell about 5 feet, but he fell into the pit. He was dead before he hit the manure because of all the methane coming off of the manure. He was dead before he hit the manure. The lady who leaned over to try to grab his hand also was dead as soon as she stuck her head down into the pit. And so here we have a husband and wife, both of them are dead because they've breathed in methane. It's really kind of strange. There was another guy that came over, saw what was happening, came over and started to go down into the pit, and then he realized that they were both dead. And so he didn't go down in. If he had, he would have been dead too. So you wonder, well, how in the world did they ever drain this pit? Well, what they did, they took a front loader, and they would go in with a scoop, and they would just go down far enough. And usually their head was above, where the wind was. So they nobody ever suffered from it. Nobody thought about it. But here, of course, with no wind, and of course the wind can't get in there anyway to clean that methane out. It was just accumulated and accumulated until it killed those people. Anyway, that's methane. Methane. Natural gas is usually it's methane, and then they convert it into propane. The natural gas is methane. There was a question as to what they use over in Hogan housing, this housing over here, this housing unit, has these 2 huge natural gas pumps or tanks. So what they do is, the question was, is it propane or is it methane? The reality is one of them is much heavier than the other one. And what they did, they bought all of these water heaters that were propane. But the reality is that they were methane. So the problem was that the propane is heavier than the methane. And because it's a heavier gas, the water heaters were overheating, and one of them blew up. But they had to convert them out to natural gas water heaters. I know. I was surprised too. I thought I didn't know the difference. But then the guy that replaced my water heater explained to me the difference between methane and propane, and that one is a larger molecule than the other one, and the one is heavier than the other one. Propane is heavier. And we have natural gas over here, and it's cheaper than propane actually. Gasoline is readily available and used as an inhalant, especially on American Indian reservations. Not so much here that I've heard of, but this is really common up on the Sioux reservations in South Dakota and North Dakota. Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Cheyenne River reservations. Real common up there, relatively common. The effect only lasts for about 3 to 5 minutes. Smelling gasoline, huffing gasoline. Not only are the hydrocarbons neurotoxic, but the solvents, metals, and additives can cause problems as well. They can cause insomnia, tremors, anorexia, paralysis, and of course lead poisoning if it has any lead in it. Of course, we don't have any lead infused gasoline anymore. We used to have leaded gasoline, and of course it was causing all kinds of interesting problems. The only leaded gasoline we have is jet fuel. Okay.
I read articles on journals. What would the keywords be that would look like a journal?
For lead,
Can use this inhalants.
which inhalant do you want? The gas?
Yeah.
We'll try inhalants and see if that works.
Okay.
Okay. Or intoxicating inhalants or something. That might work.
Okay.
Well, see if you can find it, and if you can't, we can figure something out.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. The lead poisoning, of course, the gasoline that we have today doesn't have lead in it, not in the United States, but in Europe they still put lead in their gasoline. When I was over there from 79 through 82, they were having problems with, they built their schools in the cheapest places they could find. As fascinating as that is. So they were building their schools right next to the Autobahn. Well, because they burned leaded gasoline, of course, the lead from the exhaust was drifting over into the schools, and the kids were getting lead poisoning, as strange as that sounds. So you would think, the Germans would get all up in arms and start screaming, no, we need to either move the schools or we need to unlead our gasoline. But that's not what happened. The Germans were pissed that they even suggested that they would take the lead out of their gasoline. They were really upset. They didn't care about the kids. They cared about the performance of their cars more than they cared about the kids. Germans, I swear, they're different. They're really different. You would have thought they would be all up in arms about them killing their kids. But they didn't want to move the schools because it was too expensive, and they didn't want to unlead their gasoline because it would have lowered the efficiency of their vehicles. So guess what happened? Nothing happened. They didn't do anything. And the kids, of course, were still having problems with lead poisoning, as sad as that is. Well, the parents that cared about their kids would pull their kids out of the schools that were close to the Autobahns, close to the roads, and they would move them out into the country. They would send them out into the country, wherever they could, where the air was cleaner for them, if they cared about their children. So did they close those schools that are on the Autobahns? No, they didn't, because it would have cost too much money. You think we're greedy bastards? You ought to go over to Germany sometimes. Those guys, I swear. When I was in Germany, they had a program called Ein Herz für die Kinder. Have a heart for the kids. It means have a heart for the kids. The problem they were having is that the Germans drive really fast, and they were running over kids. And they had to create a program to get these guys to slow down. Did it slow them down?
No.
No, hell no, it didn't slow them down. They They started putting fences up around the streets so the kids couldn't get out into the streets. That's how they solved the problem. Because they couldn't get the damn Germans to slow down. I lived in Zweibrücken. And Zweibrücken is a bunch of hills, just a bunch of hills. To get from the Autobahn from one Autobahn to the other, the fastest way to do that was to drive through the base. Drive through base housing. You didn't drive through the base, they couldn't get on the base. So they would drive through base housing. Well, speed limit of base housing was 20 clicks. That's about 15 miles an hour. But of course, these are Germans, and you can't tell them to slow down, and they didn't slow down. So one day, this German in a Mercedes, this kid was on the side of the road, and he stepped out into the road, and this guy hit him. But when he hit him, he rolled over him with his front tire, and his back tire picked the kid up and pulled him up into the wheel well. This sounds like really horrible. He's about 3 years old. Pulled him up into the wheel well. Of course, the Germans stopped. Thank God the Germans stopped. They couldn't get the guy to get out of his car. But what they needed to do was pull the tire out so that they could get the kid out of the wheel well. And the German wouldn't get out of his car. He locked his car. And of course, they're trying to get him to give him the keys so they can unlock the car and so that they can get the jack out. And of course, the kid is in there and he's screaming and crying and everything. So eventually what happened was the SPs came and they were about to bust the window open. And by about that time, the German Polizei pulled up. And as soon as they got there, the German got out of his car. And, he opened the trunk. It took him about 15 minutes to get this guy to open his trunk. They jacked the car up, pulled the tire off, and by that time the kid was dead. But he probably would have died anyway. I know, but we couldn't get the damn German out of the car. Yeah, well, and he felt that since he's German and he's on an American installation, he figured that we couldn't do anything. But as soon as the Polizei got there, then he jumped right out of his car. I can assure you that. It was really kind of strange. We were about ready to. We tried to pick the car up. Geez, Mercedes weighed like, a couple tons. They're so heavy. We couldn't get the car. It wouldn't have made any difference anyway. It was the wheel we needed to pull off, and we couldn't get the wheel off. We pulled off his Mercedes. This is back in '81. The Mercedes at that time had a hubcap, and so we pulled his hubcap off. Actually, we pulled all of his hubcaps off, trying to get him to get out of the car. Couldn't get him to get out of the car anyway. Sad story. Kid died anyway. Why am I talking about this? What are we doing? We're poisoning people. Residual effects might last for 5 to 6 hours. Over half of all inhalant deaths are due to gasoline inhaling. It's really dangerous. It's really hard to tell that you're getting too much. Is the problem. Alcohols are the most frequently abused inhalant solvents. Methanol, ethanol, and isopropanol, or isopropyl alcohol. When I worked in the laboratory, we used isopropanol all the time. This is rubbing alcohol. This is the stuff you drink. If you drink this stuff, you're dead. If you drink that stuff, you're blind. So, not a real good idea. When inhaled, alcohols can produce a mild high along with nausea, vertigo, weakness, vomiting, headaches, and abdominal cramping. So huffing it instead of drinking it will cause all kinds of interesting problems. For ER personnel, it is important to know the warning signs of solvent abuse. Headaches, if the person comes in with a headache, if they smell like chemicals, and I'll tell you what, you can smell the stuff on their breath. It smells like they've been breathing solvents, actually. Red, glassy, or watery eyes with dilated pupils, nosebleeds, inflamed nose, rashes around noses or mouth, slow, thick, or slurred speech, staggering gait, disorientation, lack of coordination, pains in the chest and stomach, fatigue, nausea, shortness of breath, loss of appetite, intoxication, irritability and aggression, seizure, and coma. And as you can imagine, this looks like just about anything that it could possibly be. Now the problem is, of course, if they're drunk, they look exactly the same, except for the chemical smell. If they've been taking crystal meth has a medicinal odor just like this. It doesn't really smell like smoke. It smells like they've been breathing formaldehyde. So a lot of this stuff, it's really, really difficult to tell what they came in for. If what they did was illegal, they won't tell you what it is. If they've been shooting up with crystal meth, they're not going to tell you they've been shooting up with crystal meth. They just want you to fix them. If they've been huffing gasoline, they're not going to tell you they've been huffing gasoline. Or snorting cocaine or whatever it is. They're not going to tell you. So you have to figure it out. And usually you can figure it out by the odor that they put off. Now the problem is, of course, they don't train you to smell people. And a lot of nurses won't smell people. I told you the story about I went in to draw blood in the emergency room, and I smelled alcohol as soon as I went into the room. Well, I went ahead and drew the kid's blood, and I thought it was the dad that was drunk. This kid was only like 7 or 8 years old, and I thought it was the dad that was drunk. And I went out and told the nurses, and of course, the nurses had been in there and they'd been messing around with the kid, and they didn't smell jack. They didn't smell anything because they're used to not smelling things, or they're used to closing their noses off and not smelling things, because some patients really stink. I mean, they come in really smelly. So nurses don't smell anything. Of course, I smelled it. And I went in and told the nurse, and the nurse tried to decide whether she was going to tell the doctor or not. Then she went in there, and of course she didn't smell anything. The second time she went in, then the head nurse went in. Of course she hadn't been in there before, and she smelled the alcohol. So we knew that somebody had been drinking. We assumed it was the dad, because the dad was kind of scuzzy and looked like he might be a drinker. Turned out to be the little boy was had just about drunk himself to death, and he was only 7 or 8 years old. Initially, what had happened, the dad had given him a beer to put him to sleep, and then the kid had gotten into the refrigerator and had another beer, and before he passed out, he was drinking on his 3rd beer. That's what happened. So when I went into the room and smelled the alcohol, I assumed it was the old man, but it turned out to be the kid. Yeah, and he had, oh man, it was a mess. Of course he threw up, and of course he threw up alcohol, but nobody was even thinking about that. It didn't even register with them. So when somebody comes into the emergency room, usually they're not going to tell you. That kid certainly wasn't going to admit that he's the one that drank 3 of his dad's beers. Otherwise, the old man would have beaten him to death. So we can never get the information unless they feel like they're about to die, and then they'll tell you, yeah, I was huffing, I was snorting gasoline, or I was snorting cocaine, and now I feel like I'm having a heart attack. They'll do it to save their lives. Nitrites have been used as medicines, especially heart stimulators for angina, since the 19th century. Alkyl nitrite, isomal nitrite, butyl nitrite, isobutyl nitrite, isopropyl nitrite, and cyclohexyl nitrite. These are all the volatile nitrates. Nitrites dilate blood vessels so that organs can receive more blood. This is usually done for the heart during angina attacks or with cyanide poisoning. If they have cyanide poisoning, we will make them smell. We have an ampule that we pop, and sometimes that will keep them from dying. It takes 7 to 10 seconds for the effects to take place, and it lasts for 60 to 70 seconds. It only lasts for 60 to 70 seconds. The blood pressure lowers and hits its apogee at 30 seconds, and it returns to normal after 90 seconds. Nitrites are sometimes called poppers. But this isn't by us. We don't call them poppers. Not the medical personnel. It's the people that use them for other reasons. Nitrates cause a feeling of fullness in the head, rush, it gives them a rush, mild euphoria, dizziness, and giddiness. As the inhalant burns off, they might experience headache, nausea, vomiting, and chills. Chills, and it's freaky because they'll start shaking. I know, it's so weird. Excessive abuse can cause oxygen deprivation, fainting or passing out, temporary asphyxiation. Overdoses do occur and necessitate taking the victim away from the nitrite. So they'll snort this stuff until they start having a really negative reaction. CPR might be necessary to maintain heart rhythm and respiration. Chronic users will have a reduced oxygen carrying capacity due to methahemoglobin. Nitrites are used to enhance sexual activity by increasing blood flow to sexual parts and relaxation of smooth muscles. Where do we have smooth muscles? Where do we have smooth muscles? Our heart's a smooth muscle. Are there any other smooth muscles? Our digestive system is a smooth muscle. This is especially necessary when the anal sphincter requires relaxation during anal intercourse. So these guys will use poppers to relax somebody's anal sphincter. Unfortunately, nitrites impair the immune system by inhibiting the functioning of white cells. Nitrites also convert to nitrosamines, which are cancer-causing chemicals. So if you do this stuff too much, you're going to cause yourself a lot of trouble. I was talking to a friend of mine. Oh, geez, I won't even talk about that. Sorry, I'm not even going to talk about it. Anyway, he was using nitrates. Poppers, when used with Viagra, cause lowered blood pressure in users since both medications lower the blood pressure. That's why Viagra works. That's one of the reasons why Viagra works. Well, if you use poppers at the same time, now you've lowered your blood pressure way too much. When these two drugs are used with methamphetamines, people have been known to faint or even die. And this is while they're having sex. They will die. Volatile nitrite abusers are notorious for multiple drug use. 2/3 use it at least 3 other inhalants. 1/3 abuse alcohol. 1/3 abuse drugs other than inhalants. Methamphetamines. Remember, in the gay community, methamphetamine is the second most widely used drug. The most widely used drug is marijuana, but the second most widely used drug is methamphetamines. Anesthetics are used to slow the central nervous system and stop pain from reaching the brain. Anesthetics also cause euphoric effects when abused. One of the first anesthetics to be abused was nitrous oxide. Recently, nitrous oxide has been abused along with ecstasy to accelerate the rush and to enhance the effects. Nitrous oxide is sold in small plastic canisters to be used in cooking. So you can get them in little bitty vials and use them yourself. But if you work in a kitchen, they'll have large canisters like this. So if you ever watch those cooking shows, a lot of times they'll be using nitrous oxide to flambe something. Nitrous oxide effects include dizziness, giddiness, and disorientation, silly laughter, buzzing and throbbing in the ears, visual hallucinations, confusion and headaches, feelings that one is about to pass out, impaired motor skills and fainting are other problems. The effects only last for 2 to 3 minutes. Cognitive functioning is impaired with the drug, but returns to normal after about 5 minutes. Long-term exposure can cause peripheral and central nerve cell damage due to lack of oxygen. Nitrous oxide replaces oxygen in the blood. Long-term exposure will lead to loss of balance, loss of dexterity, overall weakness, numbness in the arms and legs, cardiac arrhythmias, asphyxia, seizures, and of course, eventually death. Halothane is rarely used in the West. It is widely used in third world countries because it is inexpensive and it works very rapidly. This anesthetic is used primarily in veterinary procedures. It is most frequently abused by hospital personnel. Halothane. We don't really use it over here. Inhalants cause less physical and psychological dependence than other depressants. Inhalants cause cognitive impairments that hinder comprehension and recovery. Inhalants will sometimes cause a cross balance to the other depressants, especially alcohol if used chronically. Inhalants are seen as low class among the drug using community, of course, because you can find them in anybody's garage. In sports, they have three categories of drugs. Therapeutic drugs are used for specific medical problems and administered through proper medical supervision. These are analgesics, muscle relaxants, anti-inflammatories, and asthma medication. If you've been reading the newspaper, you know that a doctor from Michigan State University has been accused of molesting gymnasts. Now you think, gymnasts, okay, well, what's wrong with that? Well, most of these gymnasts, of course, gymnastics starts when you're very, very young, but he's been dealing with individuals that are pubescent. These are individuals in their 13, 14, 15, 16-year range, and he was sexually molesting them. Now it turns out that his boss was also molesting them. He was physically abusing and molesting some of these little girls. So these two individuals had been arrested. Their job was to do this kind of stuff. It was to repair these individuals if they were injured. They were using analgesics, muscle relaxants, anti-inflammatory, and asthma medications. Now the reality is that asthma medications are uppers. They're amphetamines. Some of the asthma medications are illegal to use if you're in athletics. So this is really kind of an interesting situation. Those two individuals, of course, have been arrested. One of them has been indicted, and he dropped the dime on the other guy, trying to lower his prison sentence. I think he's going to be in jail for the rest of his life, if I'm not mistaken. It's like 75 years, and he's in his 50s or 60s. So there's three categories. The first one is therapeutic drugs. The second one is ergogenic drugs, performance-enhancing drugs. That would include steroids, human growth hormone, blood doping, and stimulants, illegal stimulants. Of course, asthma medicine is not illegal as long as you're using it for your asthma. But these other stimulants, of course, are illegal. Recreational, and the last is recreational and mood-altering drugs that athletes can take. Athletes use drugs because they perceive drugs as a quick way to put on pounds and muscle, to increase stamina, and to get up for a game, to relieve pain, to keep up with other athletes who use drugs. And of course, this has been a serious problem in Major League Baseball. For an extended length of time, baseball players were using amphetamines. These were readily available to them in the locker room, and they were playing baseball games while being juiced up on amphetamines. In the 1990s, they started using performance-enhancing drugs. So they were using steroids. Well, some of them were afraid that they were going to get caught, so they started using steroids that couldn't be traceable. And this has been a really serious problem. The home run derby between Mark Mcgwire and Sammy Sosa, we know that it was fueled by steroids as far as Mark Mcgwire was concerned. Sammy Sosa has never admitted that he used performance-enhancing drugs. The other individual that is the poster boy for steroids is Barry Bonds. And of course, Barry Bonds has also never admitted that he used steroids. But he has the world record for home runs in a season at 72. He broke the record of Mark Mcgwire. Both Mark Mcgwire and Sammy Sosa hit Mark Mcgwire hit 70 and Sammy hit 69 that year they were racing. Anyway, so why in the world would they do this? Well, for one thing, For one thing, if you're an athlete, you're looking for a big payday. And sometimes these athletes grow up in very poverty-stricken circumstances. So if you're an athlete, and the only way for you to make the major leagues or the NBA or whatever is to cheat, would you do it? Would you do it? For the money? For the bucks? Good. Okay, we'll split it. Would you do it?
Yes.
Okay. Johnny, what do you think?
Yeah.
Would you cheat?
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll cheat, though. I just wonder if you cheat.
What do you think, Edison? Would you cheat? Wouldn't do it, huh? Huh.
Sorry, we're here to take.
You're stealing my chairs? My table? Oh, it's your table. Okay. Apologize for stealing it initially, I guess. It wasn't me. It was Irma's. She's a thief. She's a cheater. She already admitted she'd do it for money. Wasn't that perfect? They came in and took our table right at the right moment. Okay, so athletes will do it just to make the major leagues. Just to be as good as everybody else. What does it take to be an NBA basketball player or a Major League Baseball player or a professional hockey player? What does it take? It takes muscle, it takes stamina, it takes all of these things that we're talking about here. What if everybody else is cheating and you don't? That's been the question. If you read Sports Illustrated, which probably you don't, but if you read Sports Illustrated, this is what you read. Oh, do I have to stop in 5 minutes? I do have to stop in 5 minutes. Do you need to go, Johnny? You can go. Okay. Analgesics and anesthetics are used to deaden pain and to include both topicals. One of the topicals is alcohol. Of course, that's usually methanol. Sometimes it's ethanol, though. Procaine, which is a derivative of cocaine, and lidocaine are also topicals. Both of them are illicit drugs. Well, they're not if they're used as an analgesic. Orally, you can take aspirin, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, hydrocodone, which is Vicodin. Another name for it is Vicodin. Meperidine, another name is Demerol. You can take morphine, codeine, or propoxyphene. Propoxyphene, of course, is Darvon. And those are the analgesics that you can take to deaden the pain. Now, what's the problem with deadening the pain? I've injured my knee, and I need to play in the big game. So I take some Demerol, and now I can't feel my knee anymore. It doesn't hurt. What's the problem with that? Is there a problem? At least I get to play in the big game, don't I? So what? Is there a problem with that? The pain's gone. I can play up to my potential. Is there any problem with that? Do I want to do that? What happens? What potentially can happen next? It can make it worse. And I don't know, because I'm not feeling nothing. Yeah, so you can actually damage yourself for life. And usually, and if you look at old football players that played for 10 or 15 years, a lot of them played hurt. A lot of them just took aspirin and went out and played, and then they injured themselves worse, not even knowing it on the field. If they're under enough drugs, if you're taking steroids, you don't feel nothing, and your muscles are huge. Okay. The biggest problem with analgesics and anesthetics is that they take away the pain without repairing the damage, of course. You think it's repaired. Sometimes all you need to do is reduce the inflammation and the pain. The damage will improve. So taking anti-inflammatories is not a bad idea. But not taking anti-inflammatories and then going out and participating in some athletic event. Muscle relaxants are drugs that depress the neural activity within skeletal muscles and are used to treat muscle strains and ligament strains, muscle spasms, tremors, or shaking. Soma and Vandadom are used. Robaxin is a good muscle relaxant. Benzodiazepines such as Valium, Klonopin, and Librium are also muscle relaxants that you can use to cure yourself. Why don't we stop right here so Johnny can leave? I'm just kidding. It's